If wide receiver Noah Brown is going to miss significant time, the Commanders do have internal options to replace him, but counting on them to carry the wide receiver room could be a major gamble. That and more right now on Locked On Commanders.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders. I am David Harrison, your guy on the ground covering the Washington Commanders. Not only am I here with you, but I'm also covering the Commanders locally for WUSA9.com, as well as for Sports Illustrated's CommanderGameDay.com. I want to thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen or view today and every day, whether you're an everydayer or you're just checking it out. I do appreciate you. To the everydayers, a special thank you to all of you for coming through every single day. Everybody out there, if you haven't already, please subscribe for free on YouTube or wherever you're listening to today's episode. If it's your first time checking out Locked On Commanders, welcome. I appreciate you coming through. Hopefully you enjoy what you hear, what you see, and you come back again very, very soon, because this is a daily podcast brought to you by the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Coming up on today's episode, which players could swing the entire position group's grade in 2025? Did the Washington Commanders make the right call on Jeremy Chinn and Dyami Brown? But first, how the Commanders could handle a Noah Brown injury and which wideouts are worth stashing. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers, you can get $150 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. If Noah Brown is down for an extended period of time, the Commanders are not going to panic, right? It's just not their business, not their way to do so. But there is a pecking order of replacements potentially behind him, and not every name is going to be ready for a major role if that's what they're asked to do. So today's episode is going to be a mailbag episode. We've got a lot of questions from insiders. We're going to answer 5 of them here on today's episode. The first 2 coming from Seth and Ravi. Speaking about wide receiver room, Seth came through and said, what's the plan if Noah Brown suffered a season-ending injury? So for those who don't know, during the team's mandatory minicamp, Noah Brown went down with an injury, was in a lot of pain, ended up getting carted off the practice field. It was not a good sight, did not look good, did have an MRI. We don't officially know the results of that MRI. We don't even officially know which body parts the MRI was on. I could speculate. I really don't want to do that with Noah Brown's health, so I'm not going to. So the question right now that we're all waiting to find out is, was it a serious injury? Was it a mild injury? Or was it just a really scary moment? Obviously some pain involved, but he escaped anything that's going to be anything, long term. So he's been seen at some camps. He's been seen at some autograph, things, and people are speculating of, well, I heard him say this, or I saw his body language do this. Again, we're not going to get into all that right now, but we are going to answer the question of, if Noah Brown has to miss an extended period of time, what are the options? What does it look like for the Washington Commanders? And there are some internal options. Like last season, it's basically going to be a group of guys. It's not going to be one person, right? We had the question early last season of who wide receiver number 2 was going to be behind Terry McLaurin, and the answer was basically a lot of people. Everybody's going to be wide receiver number 2. Sometimes Zach Ertz is going to be wide receiver 2. It might be Noah Brown, might be Olamide Zaccheaus, Jamison Crowder, Dyami Brown, Luke McCaffrey's going to have the opportunity, right? And ultimately, it really ended up being Noah Brown. Noah Brown was that second receiver behind Terry McLaurin. And then when Noah went down with his fluke injury, because he just can't catch a break in his NFL career, then the group mentality came back. We saw OZ, we saw Jamison, we saw Dyami come through and really kind of step up. Zach Ertz stepped up all season long. But obviously we want to keep this to the receiver realm, right? Zach Ertz, we know, is a known commodity. Terry McLaurin is a known commodity once he gets back on the field after his contract gets done. So it's going to be very similar. If Noah Brown has to miss extended period of time, who is wide receiver number 3, right? Because Deebo Samuel is here now to be wide receiver number 2. Who's going to be that third guy? It's not a small question, because in today's NFL, your third receiver is basically a starter, right? Even if a lot of depth charts only list 2 starters, your third guy is essentially a starter these days. So it's not a small question. And really, you have to break it down by what Noah Brown can do. Noah Brown can play the Z, he can play the X, and he can operate out of the slot. We've seen him do all of these things. So replacing Noah Brown as a Z receiver, when I look at this roster as it currently stands today, I think your most likely Z receiver replacement for Noah Brown 1-for-1 is going to be Jaylin Lane. And that's where we kind of talk about who are these guys and are they ready for these major roles? I think it's obviously premature, right, to say that Jaylin Lane is ready for a premier role, even a number 3 Z receiver type of role. So who's the Z receiver? Z receiver lines up off the line of scrimmage, outside the formation, usually opposite of the X. The X is usually almost always going to be Terry McLaurin. So if Terry's on the left where he usually lines up, your Z is going to be on the opposite side, but he's going to be off the line of scrimmage. Gets a little bit more room to avoid press man coverage, aggressive DBs, which gives him a lot of advantage there. Oftentimes is used in motion. He can usually be used in jet sweeps and all those kinds of things. Fast, twitchy, route technician type of guy, certainly fits the mold for that X or that Z receiver. So Jaylin certainly has some of those traits, but again, he's a rookie. He's a 4th round draft pick. You know what I mean? It's too early to expect him to come in there and be that guy to the fullest extent that Noah Brown's going to be. Even though Noah's not the most twitched up dude in the world, certainly Jaylin Lane, a different style of receiver, but I think that's the guy. Like if you're looking for a 1-for-1, who's that third option as a Z, it's probably going to be Jaylin Lane. An example of a Z that you're going to see a lot this season is Deebo Samuel. I think Deebo is going to be your primary Z receiver, right? So you can say that the replacement is going to be Noah Brown. For Noah Brown there is going to be Deebo, but really Deebo is going to primarily have that role anyway. Replacing Noah Brown as an X on the rare occasion where Terry is not the X. I think Michael Gallup, right, could fit the bill. KJ Osborne potentially. And again, we kind of get into this category of like, how much do we really want these guys stepping into major roles? The good news is, like we just kind of discussed, Terry McLaurin is your X receiver, right? He's your guy that's on the line of scrimmage. Usually he's lined up on the open side of the field, furthest away from the quarterback. Usually he's going to face press man coverage, but you trust him to either fight it off technique-wise or fight it off physically, beat those jams and get out there your traditional quote-unquote number 1 wide receiver. So again, Terry is going to fill that role more times than not, so you're not super concerned about it. But when you look at the depth of the wide receiver room, who is the X receiver if it's not Terry outside of Noah, there's very slim pickings there. Who's replacing Noah Brown and his slot duties? Well, that to me looks like Luke McCaffrey. Could also be an emergency Z, right? Could Luke McCaffrey operate from the outside? We saw him get some opportunities to train out there and to develop his skills as a Z receiver. Your slot guy, again, usually between the outside receiver and the offensive line. Usually he's covered by a nickel or a linebacker or maybe even a safety. You typically like him to be a little quick, shifty, little short area quickness, good hands, work over the middle of the field. Again, Curtis Samuel is probably like the most slot receiver, prototype that we've seen in this team in a long time. But again, Deebo will work in there. Luke is a different type of slot receiver. He's not a Curtis Samuel type, but Noah Brown is not a Curtis Samuel type. I think honestly, the ability to move Deebo Samuel, we've kind of referenced it a couple times here, talking about this already. The ability to move Deebo Samuel into the slot as your Z receiver, very valuable here, because you're going to have the opportunities to say, well, Noah Brown's replacement as a slot in this formation is not going to be Luke McCaffrey. It's actually going to be Deebo. We're going to move Deebo into the slot, and now maybe Luke is your Z, or Jaylin is your Z receiver, or we would normally have Noah as the Z here. We're going to put Deebo in the Z, and then we're going to have Luke inside the slot or Jaylin in the slot, right? So they have some good versatility, some good opportunities here. Of course, you want to see Noah Brown come back and be able to do all the things he's going to be asked to do, but there are some potential receivers for this team to look at. Jaylin Lane's ability as a return specialist certainly increases his value as well. Some free agent options, guys that are still out there. I think Amari Cooper is probably the best one. I know his name was basically immediately dropped by several reporters when Noah Brown was carted off the practice field. Wouldn't hate that. Not really sure what's going on with why he doesn't have a team, at least not as the time that we're sitting down to record. Of course, he could sign at any moment with anybody. Keenan Allen is a name that's been out there as well. Gabe Davis is more of a one-trick kind of De'Ami Brownish type of player. Tyler Boyd is also out there. Of course, Jameson Crowder and Jaden had a great connection in 2024. Wouldn't hate at all seeing them bring him back here because of this situation. Plenty of cap space in 2025 and 2026 if the Commanders need to use it. So no worries there. Ravi's question, any stash-worthy wide receivers kind of emerge with Terry McLaurin out? So Terry McLaurin not participating in the mandatory minicamp, not participating in OTAs, obviously opening the doors to reps for other people. Luke McCaffrey, Jaylin Lane getting a lot more work. Noah Brown was looking really good up until the point of his injury. Outside of those guys, I mean, KJ Osborne made some plays. You know what I mean? Certainly he's a capable receiver, so could look out for him more. Chris Moore made a lot of really good plays. I think definitely made a name for himself. Michael Strawn also made some really good plays for himself. So those three guys really kind of flashed. Ja'Cory Brooks, undrafted free agent, didn't flash as much as I really kind of hoped he would. So we'll see if he can pick it up a little bit more when training camp comes around. But if wide receiver depth is all about flexibility and fit, then the same philosophy shows up in how the team handles re-signing and secondary decisions. That's coming up next on today's Mailbag episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders is brought to you by FanDuel. Summer sports are in full swing, and whether you're catching baseball under the lights, if you're locked into high-stakes international soccer, or if you're following the PGA Tour, FanDuel is the best way to make every matchup feel like a championship moment. You're already following the action, so why not make it just a little bit more thrilling for yourself? With FanDuel, you can get in on the game while your friends are out there getting sunburned at the beach or by the pool. I've been using FanDuel to track summer matchups and stay locked into rising stars and breakout names, just like some of the ones we're going to talk about today. Whether it's placing a bet on a young receiver stepping into a bigger role, watching a same game parlay ride into the late innings, FanDuel has the ability to add another level of intensity to your game watching enjoyment. The app is easy to use, it's fast to pay out, and keeps things fresh with daily promos and fun ways to play. So even regular season baseball games or summer-friendly games become must-watch events. If you're new to FanDuel, new customers can bet just $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. So open the FanDuel app today or visit FanDuel.com to get started. The Commanders aren't just building their roster, they're building their culture, continuing into year two, building that culture, that brotherhood, and that means being smart about who they pay and just as smart about who they let walk away. We've got questions coming up now from the mailbag from Richard and Merl. And Richard coming through says, why isn't the team more aggressive about re-signing players like Dyami Brown or even extending Terry McLaurin? So I know a lot of Commanders fans are a little bit frustrated. I don't know if they're just as frustrated as Terry McLaurin reportedly is, but certainly frustrated. Want to get the Terry McLaurin deal done sooner rather than later. And I think Terry agrees. I think even the team agrees to a certain extent. But the bottom line on Dyami Brown is Dyami priced himself out, right? And this is something that we talked about towards the end of last season with how he was performing even at the end of the regular season and of course into the playoffs. I mean, playoff Dyami showed up in a huge way, and I was incredibly happy for him because I basically knew that was going to mean a very substantial payday for him, but most likely not in Washington, right? And he ends up getting a $10 million deal from the Jacksonville Jaguars that is worth $9.5 million guaranteed. Like when Dyami Brown signed and named a paper, he was going to be owed $9.5 million this year alone. That's $500,000 in incentives and potential that he could still earn and that he might not earn. But whatever Dyami Brown does for the Jacksonville Jaguars, he's walking out of 2025 with $9.5 million. And he's doing it in Florida where there's no state income tax. So pretty great deal. Noah Brown comes back, $3.25 million. That's who they re-signed, right? So look, that's just the nature of the business. The Jacksonville Jaguars were willing to pay Dyami that number. And, personally, I hope that he proves them that value. I hope that he goes over there and shows them that value. But that is basically why Dyami Brown was not kept in here. If you're going to pay Dyami Brown $10 million after what he did, I mean, you're going to look at paying Terry McLaurin like $40 million, right? After what he did comparatively. So speaking of Terry, obviously Terry's extension, I don't think anybody, to this moment is still concerned about the extension conversations or anything like that. I know, a lot of sites nowadays are, maybe he'll get traded to the Steelers, maybe the Raiders, maybe the, Seahawks, who knows? But I don't feel like a trade is incoming personally. Again, no inside information on that. The team does a really good job of keeping those things zipped up tight. So I'm not giving you that as, it's not like Adam Peters is feeding us information to put out to you guys here to sway the tide over to the franchise's side. That's just my gut feeling on the situation. If it happens, we'll be surprised together. I'll put it to you that way. But look, the extension is probably going to start in 2026, right? The current 2025 money is probably going to stay the same. So really, we're talking about future money. When we're talking about future money, you just don't feel like you're in that big of a rush. Terry does have a void year built into his current contract for next year. That's $5.6 million. So they've got to move that $5.6 million into the current contract. And of course, Terry is not going to want that to take away from any new money. He's going to want that to be counted as old money. It's not new money. So you're going to add that into this new contract, but that's on top of everything else that we're going to get. Or the new deal could actually very well start this year, basically swallow all the remaining money. It's just a new deal and everything starts this contract year. And look, that's, there's a lot of just kind of things to it. And when you look at Adam Peters and the way that he does his contracts, basically it's evident that he favors targeted retention over emotional extensions, right? And there's a very, very significant difference between the two. And look, not every team practices what you would assume is the smarter thing, which is targeted retention, re-signing or extending players based on on-field value, scheme fit, and projected future performance. Also, leadership traits, locker room influence certainly come into it, right? But there was a time where Terry McLaurin was basically the leader of the locker room. Nowadays, that's not the case. In fact, he's not even the only leader in the wide receiver room necessarily. You're taking popularity, you're taking the emotional connection out of it, and you're keeping business. That's what this is all about, right? And we've talked about future performance, talked about past and all that stuff, and how players and organizations see the things. But typically, you're rooted in performance metrics. You're not looking at nostalgic type of things. You're not looking at, well, you were a third round pick and now you're a number one receiver, so man, let's pay you extra. Nothing like that. Oftentimes, these types of GMs usually operate with shorter contracts. We've seen that from AP in the free agent market, shorter contracts, a lot of incentive heavy type of contracts, or the shorter the more guaranteed money you want, the shorter the contract is probably going to be, and usually just aligns with organizational goals, right? Leadership, versatility, and development. They want to be developing, building. We talk about building through the NFL draft. We're always developing that future echelon of talent. Jaylin Lane, is he ever going to be a future number one receiver? Doesn't look like it right now, right? But Terry McLaurin in the third round didn't look like it either. So, how is that going to go? How does the future draft class kind of play into this whole thing? All of these things kind of, come into play. Former Jets GM Mike Tannenbaum used to call it portfolio management, quote unquote, when he was at ESPN, talking about teams paying for expected performance, not your resume. Don't come in here with what you've already done, expecting to be paid in retrospect. Come in here and we're going to figure out what you're projected to do, and we're going to pay you for that. According to Andrew Brandt, ex-Packers VP, in a Sports Illustrated article, quote, smart teams pay for future value, sentimental teams pay for past production, end quote. And, look, that's one way to do it, but it does look like that Adam Peters kind of follows that same mold. Merl came through, said, should the team have kept Jeremy Chinn or moved Benjamin St-Juste to safety? So Jeremy Chinn, just like De'Ami Brown, basically was priced out. He's currently the 22nd highest paid safety in the league by annual average value with the Las Vegas Raiders. 2 years, $8.1 million per year is the contract that he got. Given that you have two starting safeties on every team, the Raiders basically paid Jeremy Chinn like he's a top third of the league safety, and he simply just isn't that. I'm a big Jeremy Chinn fan, really enjoyed getting to know him last year, really thought and hoped that he would be back this year. But you can't call a guy that really can't cover more than like a mid-level tight end a top third safety in the NFL. You just can't. Now, that being said, Jeremy also plays a position that not every team uses, that hybrid safety linebacker type of role. So I'm curious to see what Washington does defensively, because they don't really have a clear Jeremy Chinn replacement. So they're going to have to adjust not having him, whether it's adjusting the scheme, the personnel usage, things like that. Potentially they see a Kane Medrano or a Tyler Owens, someone like that being that Jeremy Chinn type, just not obviously as physically imposing. But the Raiders, they've got Pete Carroll as their head coach, talk about Legion of Boom and that history. Clearly, they're going to plan to use that type of safety, kind of like how they had Cam Chancellor back in the Legion of Boom days. Ultimately, that's really going to determine whether or not the Commanders should have gone out there and overpaid for him. But you have to remember, it also takes two to tango, right? Because I have a hard time believing the Commanders didn't at least try to come to the table and get Jeremy Chinn brought back for 2025. Maybe they weren't willing to overpay, or maybe Jeremy just wanted too much. Who knows? Maybe the Raiders just came in high and said, like, the Commanders aren't going to jump this high, so we're going to jump this high and steal you away from them. Instead, now they've got an open role for maybe Tyler Owens, Will Harris, who came in at $4 million annual average value, which is half of Jeremy Chinn's annual average value. UDFA Robert McDaniel physically is like the most Jeremy Chinn-like guy, but obviously, it's too early to project UDFA as like a starting safety hybrid, linebacker type. Jeremy Reeves obviously is known for his willingness to get a little bit dirty down there in the box. Percy Butler, if he can provide a little bit more physical play, and all that stuff. As far as Benjamin St-Juste going to safety, that is something that I thought should happen with him going back to his days as a rookie. Even before he was drafted, I remember watching him at the Reese Senior Bowl, and the first time I saw him, I said, this dude needs to be a free safety coverage guy. The thing is, this team clearly wants both safeties to not only be able to cover as much as possible, but also be willing to stick their face in the fan. Quan Martin, more of your free safety coverage type, right? But if the run comes his way or if there's a physical tight end coming down there, he's going to get in there and he's going to get nasty with them. That's what they want. Benjamin St-Juste just simply does not fill that role. So as far as Benjamin St-Juste is concerned, no, I don't think he was a fit for this team stylistically, mentally. So I think that his departing and ending up with the Los Angeles Chargers is certainly a better fit for him than it would have been in Washington. Washington's approach to re-signing show a clear plan, but sometimes it all still comes down to who stepped up when the games start. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Who is going to step up in their position groups? That is our final question here in the mailbag, brought to you by Insider Cam. And we're going to go through 3 position groups here: defensive line, secondary, and wide receiver. Don't have time to go through every single position group. Of course, if you guys want us to go through more position groups, you can certainly ask that question for future mailbag episodes, and we can do that as well. But defensive line, I think you're looking at either Daron Payne or Javon Kinlaw. I think those two guys, both of them would be great, but one of them or one or the other absolutely needs to step up for this group in 2025. Daron Payne, you want to see him bounce back from that 2024 look. He led all Commanders D linemen in snaps last year. So certainly, clearly, the Commanders, from a rotational standpoint, see something in him. They brought him back. They kept him. They've been praising him all off season, but he only had 4 sacks last year, only made a handful of splash plays outside of that. Like, you got to see more out of Daron. It's great that he's getting more vocal, becoming more of a leader in that group. You got to see it in his play as well. Javon Kinlaw, we talked about it on yesterday's episode. I consider him a low-risk gamble. If you're scratching your head and how is he low risk with that contract, go back to yesterday's episode. I explained it there. But his performance is going to determine whether or not his 2026 hit, right? Because that hit is big. It's $16.2 million against the salary cap. I don't care if the Washington Commanders have the most salary cap space open in 2026. That's still a lot of cap space to give to one guy. So his performance in 2025 is going to determine whether or not we think that's good, bad, or like value. So I think either of those two guys, if either of them can step up and be a big time difference maker for this defense, is going to go a long, long way into making the entire experiment more successful. In the secondary, I kind of look at Quan Martin, Will Harris, and I don't know if I really want to say versus Will Harris, right? Quan Martin potentially becoming the cornerstone safety on the team now that he's healthy. He's in his second year as a full-time safety. He just gets to focus on those deals or on those tasks and deal with that whole thing. Will Harris, kind of he's an older, more veteran version of Quan Martin, right? Like, is he a challenger to Quan Martin's snaps, or is he, going to be kind of just, we'll have the same type of safety with both of our starting safeties? Both of those guys, like I said, are willing to come down into the box, willing to make plays defensively, tackling, all those things. Not as big or as imposing as a Jeremy Chin, but certainly willing to do the job. So potentially you have both those guys back there. So it'll be interesting to see how that whole thing unfolds. But if one or both or either of these guys can step up for that back end of that secondary, then you're going to keep those explosives down just like they did last year in the passing game. That's going to force teams to extend drives, force teams to put the ball in the air more. Every time you put the ball in the air, you're putting it in jeopardy and potentially lead to more takeaways, which clearly this team needs to do more of in 2025. Wide receiver room, Deebo Samuel. I'm looking at Deebo Samuel here, especially if Noah Brown is out for an extended period of time. Knock on wood that he's not. But I think Deebo is going to be the most pivotal guy in that wide receiver room. We know what Terry is. We also know a little bit what Noah is. Luke looks like he's stepping up. Jaylin Lane is going to be, a 4th-round rookie. We're not looking for him to do a whole heck of a lot in the offense outside of some spot, opportunities. But if Deebo can be more than just a gadget guy, if he can be a real, true, consistent part of this offense, then it's going to be a really big boost for the Washington Commanders, for Cliff Kingsbury, his ability to be creative and open things up, and also for Jaden Daniels to operate on all 4 levels of the field. Remember, I always talk about short, intermediate, deep, the 3 levels everybody knows, but I always look at behind the line of scrimmage as a 4th layer. And if you're watching Cliff Kingsbury's offense, you already know that 4th layer is very, very important to this team. So whether it's smart roster planning, culture setting moves, or high pressure players with something to prove, the Commanders 2025 season is going to be shaped by more than just the stars. That's going to do it for today's mailbag episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we're going to wrap up the week by spotlighting the biggest winners of the offseason so far, from players earning expanded roles to the front office reshaping the future. I'm going to tell you who gained the most ground before we hit training camp. In the meantime, if you got questions or comments, you can text them directly to me by becoming a Locked On Commanders insider. To do that, go to joinsubtext.com Locked On Commanders. Thanks for making Locked On Commanders your first listen today. And for your second listen, check out the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast as Washington leans on targeted retention and depth planning. Kyle Krabs and Joe Marino break down how smart roster building decisions shape the futures of all the teams across the National Football League. Find the Locked On NFL Scouting podcast on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Commanders your first listen. To the everydayers out there, I see you, I appreciate you, and I thank you every single day. Until next time, stay safe, be kind to one another. We'll talk again soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.